The smoke was everywhere. Taylor couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't think beyond the primal terror that had seized every muscle in her body. One moment, she had been sleeping peacefully in her third-floor apartment, dreaming about the presentation she had to give on Monday. The next, she was choking awake to a shrill scream that she realized, with dawning horror, was coming from her own throat. The ceiling above her bedroom was glowing orange, not the soft orange of morning light filtering through curtains, but the hungry, violent orange of flames consuming everything in their path. The smoke detector was shrieking somewhere in the distance, but it seemed impossibly far away, drowned out by the crackling roar that surrounded her on all sides. She rolled out of bed, hitting the floor hard, her palms slapping against carpet that was already warm beneath her fingertips. Stay low. That's what they taught you in school, wasn't it? Stay low where the air is cleaner. But the air wasn't clean anywhere. It was thick and acrid, clawing at her lungs with every shallow breath she managed to drag in. Taylor crawled toward where she thought the door was, her eyes streaming tears that had nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with survival. Her hand found the door frame, and she reached up to touch the wood. Hot. Too hot. She jerked her hand back with a gasp, skin stinging from even that brief contact. She couldn't go that way. The window. She had to get to the window. But when she turned, she saw that the fire had spread faster than she could have imagined. The corner of her room where her bookshelf stood was fully engulfed now, paperbacks she'd collected since college curling into ash and ember. The flames were between her and the window, and they were growing, feeding on oxygen and old wood and everything she owned. Help! The word tore from her throat, raw and desperate. Somebody help me! Please! She pressed herself against the wall, the only wall that wasn't burning yet, and felt the heat intensifying around her like a living thing that wanted her dead. This was it. This was how she was going to die, alone and terrified in her apartment at 26 years old, with so much left undone, so much left unsaid. Her parents. God, her parents would have to identify her body. Or worse, there might not be anything left to identify. A sob racked through her, and she curled into herself, arms wrapped around her knees, making herself as small as possible while the world burned around her. The smoke was so thick now that she could barely see her own hands in front of her face. Her lungs were screaming for clean air that didn't exist anymore. And then, through the chaos and the terror and the roaring of the flames, she heard something else. A crash, splintering wood, a voice cutting through the noise like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Fire department! Call out if you can! Hear me! Taylor tried to answer, but her throat had closed up, her body using every ounce of energy just to keep breathing. She lifted one arm, waving weakly in the direction of the voice, praying he could see her through the smoke. I've got her. Northwest corner. Suddenly, there were hands on her, strong and sure, lifting her from the floor like she weighed nothing at all. She felt herself being cradled against a chest that was solid and real and not on fire. And she grabbed fistfuls of whatever material she could reach, the heavy fabric of a firefighter's coat, and held on like her life depended on it, because it did. I've got you. His voice was right next to her ear now, somehow calm despite everything. Keep your face against me and don't open your eyes. I'm going to get you out of here. Taylor did exactly as he said, pressing her face into the protective gear and squeezing her eyes shut so tight she saw stars behind her lids. She could feel him moving, his body navigating through the chaos with a confidence that seemed impossible, given what she knew was surrounding them. The heat intensified briefly. So hot, she thought she might actually catch fire herself. And then suddenly, blessedly, she felt cool air against her back. They were moving down. Stairs? A ladder? She didn't know and didn't care. All she knew was that the arms holding her never faltered, never loosened their grip, and the voice kept murmuring reassurances against the top of her head. Almost there. You're doing great. Just keep breathing for me. And then there was grass beneath her back. Cold, damp grass that was the most wonderful thing she had ever felt in her entire life. She opened her eyes to a sky full of flashing lights and stars, and the face of a man looking down at her with concern etched into every line of his soot-streaked features. Hey there. Welcome back. He had brown eyes. That was the first coherent thought Taylor managed to form. Warm brown eyes that were studying her with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she couldn't explain. His helmet was pushed back, revealing sweat-dampened hair that was dark at the temples, and there was a smudge of ash across the bridge of his nose that should have looked ridiculous, but somehow didn't. You... Taylor's voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat ravaged by smoke. She coughed, and immediately he was there with an oxygen mask, pressing it gently over her nose and mouth. Don't try to talk yet. Just breathe. The paramedics are coming to take you to the hospital, okay? You're going to be fine. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to ask his name, to know something about this stranger who had walked into an inferno for her without hesitation. But her body was finally catching up to the trauma it had endured, and darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was his face. Those brown eyes still watching her, one gloved hand resting on her shoulder like he was reluctant to let her go. Taylor woke to the steady beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. For a long, disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was or how she'd gotten there. The ceiling was white. The walls were white. Everything was too bright, too clean, too far removed from the smoke and flames that were still dancing behind her closed eyelids every time she blinked. Taylor? Honey, can you hear me? Her mother's face swam into view, lines of worry carved deep around her eyes and mouth. Her father was there too, standing just behind her mother's shoulder, his hand resting on his wife's back in that quietly supportive way he'd always had. Mom? Taylor's voice was still rough, her throat raw and tender. What happened? How did you... The hospital called us. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. They said there was a fire. They said you... She couldn't finish the sentence, just shook her head and reached for Taylor's hand, squeezing it tight. You scared us half to death, sweetheart. Her father's voice was thick with emotion he was trying not to show. But you're okay. That's what matters. You're okay. The next few hours passed in a blur of doctors and nurses and tests. Taylor had inhaled a significant amount of smoke, they told her, and there were minor burns on her arms and shoulders that she didn't even remember getting. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation, maybe longer depending on how her lungs responded to treatment. She nodded along to everything they said, but her mind kept drifting back to the fire, to the moment she'd been certain she was going to die, to the arms that had lifted her from the flames and carried her to safety, to those brown eyes. It was late afternoon when she finally had a moment alone. Her parents had gone to get coffee and call her sister with an update, and the room was quiet except for the mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor. Taylor was staring at the ceiling, replaying the rescue in her mind for what felt like the 100th time, when there was a soft knock at her door. She turned her head, expecting another nurse with another chart. Instead, she saw him. He looked different out of the firefighting gear. Younger, somehow, though she guessed he was probably in his early 30s. He was wearing jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that stretched across broad shoulders, and his hair, now that it wasn't plastered to his head with sweat, was a deep brown with just a hint of wave to it. But those eyes were exactly the same, warm and brown and full of a quiet intensity that made her breath catch in her chest. "Hi." He hovered in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame like he wasn't sure if he should come in. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Taylor pushed herself up higher against the pillows, suddenly very aware of what she must look like. Hospital gown, tangled hair, probably raccoon eyes from mascara she hadn't had a chance to wash off before the world caught fire. "You came back." The words slipped out before she could stop them. "You saved my life. I never got to thank you properly. I don't even know your name." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he stepped into the room, letting the door close softly behind him. Joseph Hartwell. He stopped at the foot of her bed, hands shoved into his pockets like he didn't quite know what to do with them. "And you don't have to thank me. I was just doing my job." "Just doing your job?" Taylor shook her head, feeling tears prick at her eyes that she refused to let fall. "Joseph, I was going to die in that room." I had accepted it. I was saying goodbye to everyone I loved in my head, and then you were there, and you... Her voice cracked, and she had to stop to collect herself. Joseph's expression shifted, something softer entering those brown eyes. He moved around to the side of the bed, closer now, and she could smell soap and something woodsy beneath it, probably whatever he'd used to scrub the smoke off his skin. "Hey." He hesitated for just a moment, then reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, the hand of someone who worked with them every day. "You're here. You're alive. That's what matters, okay? Everything else, the apartment, your stuff, it can all be replaced. You can't be." The sincerity in his voice broke something open in Taylor's chest. A tear slipped down her cheek despite her best efforts, and then another. And suddenly she was crying in earnest, great gasping sobs that shook her entire body and made her damaged lungs ache in protest. Joseph didn't say anything. He didn't try to offer empty platitudes or tell her to calm down. He just held her hand and let her cry, his thumb tracing slow, soothing circles over her knuckles until the storm passed and she was left feeling wrung out and oddly peaceful. "I'm sorry." Taylor wiped at her face with her free hand, embarrassed by the outburst. "I don't usually fall apart on strangers." "You're allowed to fall apart." Joseph's voice was quiet but firm. "You went through something traumatic. Anyone would need to process that." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and found herself struck by the gentleness in his face. He had a strong jaw and features that could have been stern, if not for the softness around his eyes, the easy curve of his mouth. He looked like someone who had seen terrible things and chosen to respond with kindness instead of becoming hard. How long have you been a firefighter? 8 years. He settled into the chair beside her bed, still holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Started as a volunteer when I was 23. Went full-time 2 years later. That's incredible. Taylor found herself wanting to know more, wanting to understand this man who had risked his life to save hers without a moment's hesitation. What made you want to do it? Joseph was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where late afternoon light was streaming through the blinds. My little brother almost died in a house fire when we were kids. His voice was soft, the words carrying the weight of old pain. I was 12. He was 7. The firefighters who saved him, I remember watching them carry him out, watching them breathe life back into him, and thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to be the person who shows up when everything is falling apart and makes it okay again. Taylor felt her heart squeeze in her chest. There was so much depth to this man, so much more than the hero who had carried her out of the flames. He was human, with his own scars and motivations and dreams. Did your brother make it? Yeah. A genuine smile broke across Joseph's face, transforming it entirely. He's a paramedic now, actually. Works for the county. Drives me crazy at family dinners talking about all the calls he's been on. Taylor laughed, a real laugh that surprised them both, and then winced as it aggravated her smoke-ravaged throat. Take it easy. Joseph released her hand to reach for the water pitcher on her bedside table, pouring her a cup. Small sips. She took the cup from him, their fingers brushing in the exchange, and felt a spark of something she couldn't quite name travel up her arm. It was probably nothing, probably just her emotional state, her gratitude, the intensity of everything she'd been through in the last 24 hours. But when she looked up and found Joseph watching her with that same quiet intensity, she wondered if maybe it was something more. I should probably let you rest. He stood, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that seemed almost nervous. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Make sure you didn't need anything. Wait! The word was out before Taylor could think better of it. Joseph paused, halfway to the door, and turned back to look at her. Thank you for coming. It means more than you know. He smiled again, that same soft smile that made something flutter in her chest. Get some rest, Taylor. Take care of yourself. He pulled a small card from his pocket and set it on her bedside table. That's the station number if you ever need anything. And my personal cell is on the back, in case you want to talk, or if you have questions about anything. And then he was gone, the door closing quietly behind him, and Taylor was left staring at the little white card like it was the most precious thing anyone had ever given her. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Joseph Hartwell, Station 47. And on the back, scrawled in neat, masculine handwriting, a phone number and 3 words that made her heart do something entirely unexpected. Call anytime. J. Taylor was released from the hospital 2 days later with a prescription for inhalers, a follow-up appointment with a pulmonologist, and absolutely nowhere to go. Her apartment was gone. Not damaged, not salvageable, but gone. The fire had started in the unit below hers, faulty wiring, the investigator said, and had consumed the entire building before the flames could be stopped. Everything she owned was ash and memory now. Her clothes, her furniture, the photo album she'd inherited from her grandmother, all of it vanished in a single night. Her parents had offered to fly her home to Ohio, but Taylor had declined. Her life was here, her job, her friends. what little remained of the existence she'd built for herself. Running home felt like admitting defeat, and she wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. Instead, she was staying with her best friend Meredith in Meredith's one-bedroom apartment on the other side of the city. Meredith had immediately cleared out her closet to make room for the handful of donated clothes Taylor now owned, had given her the bed while she herself took the couch, and had generally been an absolute angel about the entire situation. But Taylor could see the worry in her friend's eyes, the way Meredith watched her when she thought Taylor wasn't looking, the careful tiptoeing around any topic that might remind Taylor of what she'd lost. It had been 5 days since the fire, and Taylor still hadn't called Joseph. The card sat on Meredith's nightstand, propped up against a lamp like an accusation. Every night, Taylor looked at it before she went to sleep. Every morning, she told herself she would call today. And every day, she found some excuse not to. What would she even say? "Hi, you saved my life and I can't stop thinking about you, and I'm not sure if that's because you're objectively wonderful or because my brain is trauma bonding me to the first person who showed me kindness in my darkest moment." Yeah, that would go over well. "You're staring at that card again." Meredith's voice cut through Taylor's thoughts, making her jump. Her friend was leaning against the bedroom door frame, arms crossed, a knowing look on her face. "You know, phones work in both directions. You could just call him." "I'm not," Taylor sighed, setting down the cup of tea she'd been nursing for the past hour. "It's complicated." "It's really not." Meredith crossed the room and sat down beside Taylor on the bed. "Hot Firefighter saves your life, gives you his personal number, tells you to call any time. Where exactly is the complication?" "The complication is that I don't know what I'm feeling." Taylor pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Is it real? Is it just gratitude? Trauma? He was the first thing I saw when I thought I was going to die, Mare. Of course I'm going to feel something for him. But is that something genuine? Or is my brain just doing weird survival things? Meredith was quiet for a moment, considering this. "Okay, fair point." She reached over and plucked the card from the nightstand, turning it over in her hands. "But here's the thing. You'll never know unless you actually talk to him. Get to know him. Figure out if the person behind the hero is someone you actually like. What if he's not? What if I build this whole fantasy in my head and he turns out to be, I don't know, a terrible person? What if he voted for someone awful or believes the earth is flat or puts pineapple on pizza? Then you'll know, and you can move on." Meredith pressed the card into Taylor's hand. "But what if he's not a terrible person? What if he's exactly who he seemed to be? Kind and brave and genuinely interested in you. Don't you owe it to yourself to find out?" Taylor looked down at the card, at Joseph's handwriting, at the number she'd already memorized without meaning to. Maybe Meredith was right. Maybe the only way through this confusion was straight ahead. She texted him that night. It took her 45 minutes to compose a message that was exactly 2 sentences long. "Hi, this is Taylor from the hospital. I hope this isn't weird, but I wanted to thank you again for everything." The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, and Taylor's heart nearly stopped. "Not weird at all. I've been hoping you'd reach out. How are you doing?" What followed was a conversation that lasted until 2 in the morning. They talked about everything and nothing. Her recovery, his shifts at the station, favorite movies, worst food experiences, dreams they'd had as kids. When Taylor finally forced herself to put the phone down and try to sleep, her cheeks hurt from smiling. This was bad. This was very, very bad. Or maybe, a tiny voice in the back of her head suggested, this was exactly the opposite of bad. They texted every day after that, sometimes just quick check-ins, sometimes hour-long conversations that left Taylor laughing at her phone like a teenager with her first crush. She learned that Joseph had 2 dogs named Biscuit and Gravy, a naming choice he claimed to regret daily, that he volunteered at a youth center on his days off, and that he made the world's worst pancakes but refused to stop trying. I'm telling you, the batter was perfect this time, he told her over the phone one evening, 2 weeks after the fire. It's the pan that's the problem. The pan? Taylor was curled up on Meredith's couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Joseph, you've blamed the pan, the stove, the spatula, and the alignment of the planets. At what point do we consider that maybe the common denominator is you? I'm going to pretend you didn't just attack me like that. There was laughter in his voice, warm and rich, and Taylor felt it settle into her chest like something precious. When you finally try my pancakes, you'll see. They're an acquired taste. That's what people say about things that taste bad. You'll eat those words, literally, with maple syrup. Taylor bit her lip, fighting back the grin that wanted to take over her entire face. Is that an invitation? There was a pause. When Joseph spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more serious. I'd really like to see you again, Taylor. Not just texts and phone calls. Actually see you, if that's okay. Taylor's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure he could hear it through the phone. I'd like that too. Yeah? She could hear him smiling. What about this Saturday? I'm off shift. We could grab coffee or lunch or, I don't know, whatever you want. I just want to spend time with you. Coffee sounds perfect. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp, golden autumn weather that made Taylor want to believe in signs and fate and all the things she'd always been too practical to trust. She changed outfits 4 times before Meredith physically blocked the closet door and told her she looked beautiful and to stop spiraling. The final choice was simple: jeans, a soft sweater in a blue that Meredith swore brought out her eyes, and her favorite boots that she'd actually managed to replace after the fire. They met at a coffee shop downtown, one of those cozy, independent places with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Joseph was already there when Taylor arrived, sitting in a worn leather armchair by the window, and he stood up so fast when he saw her that he nearly knocked over the small table beside him. Hi. He steadied the table with one hand, looking adorably embarrassed. Sorry, I'm usually more coordinated than this. Hi yourself. Taylor couldn't help smiling at the sight of him. He was wearing a button-down shirt rolled up at the sleeves and dark jeans, and somehow he looked even better than she remembered. I'll believe the coordination thing when I see it. He laughed, and the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. Come on, sit. I didn't know what you wanted, so I waited. He gestured to the chair across from him. Also, I may have researched their entire menu and have opinions if you want. Recommendations. You researched the menu? I may have been a little nervous about this. Something warm bloomed in Taylor's chest. This confident, capable man who ran into burning buildings for a living was nervous about having coffee with her. It was ridiculous. It was wonderful. For what it's worth, I changed outfits 4 times this morning, so we're even. His eyes traveled over her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with something closer to appreciation. Well, you landed on a good one. He cleared his throat, looking away quickly like he hadn't meant to say that out loud. Anyway, Coffee. Let me go order. What can I get you?" They spent 3 hours in that coffee shop. 3 hours that felt like 30 minutes. Time slipping away in conversation and laughter, and the slow, careful process of two people learning who each other really were. Taylor learned that Joseph had grown up in a small town an hour north of the city, the oldest of 4 kids, raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. He'd gotten into firefighting partly to honor the men who saved his brother, but partly because it was one of the few careers that would let him help his family financially while still feeling like he was making a difference. "I'm not going to pretend it was all noble intentions," he admitted, stirring his 3rd cup of coffee. "There was definitely some, what can I do with a high school diploma that won't make me want to throw myself off a bridge, calculations involved." "There's nothing wrong with practicality." Taylor cupped her hands around her own mug, savoring the warmth. "You found something that lets you help people and support your family. That's pretty incredible, actually." "Thanks." His eyes met hers, and there it was again. That intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. "What about you? What made you want to do—" "Actually, I don't think I even know what you do." "I'm a project manager at a marketing firm." Taylor laughed at the way his eyebrows rose. "I know, very glamorous. I basically spend my days making spreadsheets and reminding people about deadlines." "But do you like it?" Taylor considered the question. It wasn't one people usually asked. "Honestly, I don't know. I kind of fell into it. Got a business degree because that seemed safe, got a job because that seemed responsible, and then suddenly I was 26 and my entire life was gone, and I realized I'd never actually stopped to ask myself if any of it was what I wanted." She hadn't meant to say all that. The words had just tumbled out, carried by the strange intimacy of this conversation, this connection that felt deeper than any she'd ever experienced. Joseph was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "The fire?" "The fire," Taylor nodded. "It's strange, but almost dying makes you think about things differently. Like, if that had been the end, if you hadn't gotten to me in time, would I have been happy with how I spent my life?" And the answer was, I don't know. Maybe not. "That's a heavy thing to carry." "Yeah." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Sorry, this got deep fast." "Don't apologize." Joseph leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Taylor, I didn't ask you here for small talk. I want to know you, the real you, including the deep stuff, especially the deep stuff." She looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just attraction. This wasn't just gratitude. This was something else entirely. Something that scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. "Why?" "Because you're interesting." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "Because when I carried you out of that building, I knew you were someone I needed to see again. And every text, every phone call, every conversation we've had since then has just confirmed it. I don't know where this is going, Taylor. I don't know if you feel anything for me beyond gratitude for being in the right place at the right time. But I know I want to find out. If you'll let me." Taylor's eyes were burning with tears she refused to shed. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such openness, such vulnerability, such complete absence of games or pretense. "I do feel something for you." The words came out barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can trust it." You saved my life, Joseph. Of course I'm going to feel connected to you. But how do I know that's real? How do I know it's not just my brain doing trauma things? Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the space between them and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. I think, he started, then stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. I think the only way to know if something's real is to give it time, to let it grow and change and see if it survives. I'm not asking you to declare your undying love for me over coffee. I'm just asking for a chance to get to know each other, to see where this goes. That sounds reasonable. I can do reasonable. He squeezed her hand. So what do you say? Want to keep figuring this out with me? Taylor looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was tracing gentle patterns over her knuckles, and felt something inside her settle into place. Yeah, I really do. The weeks that followed were some of the most confusing, exhilarating, and terrifying of Taylor's life. She and Joseph fell into a rhythm. Coffee dates became dinner dates, became lazy Sunday afternoons spent on his couch watching terrible movies and arguing about whether the dog always died at the end, Joseph's position, or whether that was a harmful stereotype against pet-inclusive filmmaking, Taylor's position. She met Biscuit and Gravy, who turned out to be a pair of elderly beagles with arthritis and an apparent grudge against anyone who wasn't Joseph. They tolerated Taylor with the kind of resigned dignity that suggested they'd seen him go through this before and knew she probably wouldn't last. They're not usually this standoffish, Joseph said after Gravy pointedly turned his back on Taylor for the third time. I think they're just protective. Of you? I'm very lovable. Clearly. That's why your dogs look at me like I'm planning to murder you in your sleep. Despite the canine cold shoulder, Taylor found herself spending more and more time at Joseph's small house on the edge of the city. It was modest. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that was slightly too narrow, a backyard that Biscuit and Gravy ruled with iron paws. But it was warm, comfortable, lived in a way that her own apartment never had been. And Joseph was there. That helped too. It was on one of those evenings, about 6 weeks after the fire, that things shifted between them. Taylor had had a hard day. Insurance complications mostly. The endless bureaucracy of trying to prove you owned things that no longer existed so that you could be compensated for their loss. She'd spent hours on the phone getting transferred and put on hold and asked to provide documentation she didn't have. And by the time she showed up at Joseph's door, she was running on fumes. He took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms without a word. Hey, what happened? And Taylor, who had been holding it together for weeks, who had been so determined to be strong and capable and not a burden, finally broke. Everything. The word came out as a sob. It's so much, Joseph. Every day there's something new to deal with, something else I lost, something else I have to replace or explain or justify. And I try to stay positive. I try to remember that I'm alive and that's what matters. But sometimes I can't. Sometimes I'm just so tired and so sad and I don't know how to make it stop. Joseph didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer solutions or silver linings or any of the well-meaning platitudes that people had been giving her since the fire. He just held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped firmly around her waist, and let her fall apart in the safety of his arms. I've got you." His voice was steady and warm against her hair. "You don't have to be strong right now. Just let it out." She cried until she had nothing left. Until her eyes were swollen and her nose was running, and she was pretty sure she'd left a giant wet spot on the front of Joseph's shirt. And still he held her, steady as a rock, anchoring her through the storm. When the tears finally slowed, he guided her to the couch, settled her against his side with a blanket draped over her legs, and went to make tea. She heard him moving around in the kitchen, the clink of mugs, the whistle of the kettle, and felt something profound shift in her chest. This man had seen her at her worst, literally seen her choking and terrified and covered in soot, and now metaphorically seen her broken and ugly crying on his doorstep. And he hadn't flinched, hadn't pulled away, hadn't treated her like she was too much or too broken or too anything. He'd just held her. When Joseph returned with 2 steaming mugs, Taylor took hers with hands that were finally steady. "Thank you." She didn't just mean the tea. "Anytime." He settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Taylor, I need you to hear something. You're not a burden. What you're going through, the grief, the exhaustion, all of it, that's not weakness. That's being human. And you never have to pretend to be okay around me. Not ever. I'm so used to handling things on my own." Taylor stared into her tea, watching the steam rise. "Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the one who had it together. I don't know how to be this. This. Vulnerable, needy, out of control." Joseph was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Can I tell you something?" Taylor nodded. "About a year ago, we had a bad call. Really bad. A family trapped in a car after a highway accident. We got the parents out, but the kids..." He paused, his jaw tightening. "We lost one of them. A little boy, 4 years old. We did everything right, followed every protocol, but it wasn't enough." Taylor reached for his hand, squeezing tight. "After that, I wasn't okay for a long time. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I'd see his face every time I closed my eyes. And I did what you're doing now. I tried to handle it alone. Told myself I had to be strong, had to push through, couldn't let anyone see me struggling." "What happened?" "I almost lost everything. My captain noticed I was spiraling, made me take time off, practically forced me into therapy. I resisted for weeks, thought getting help meant I was weak, meant I couldn't hack it." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious. "It didn't. Getting help meant I was human. It meant I wanted to survive. And letting people in, letting them see the parts of me that were broken, that's what actually saved me." Taylor felt tears prickling at her eyes again, but these were different. These weren't tears of despair. They were tears of recognition, of gratitude, of the profound relief that comes from being truly understood. "Thank you for telling me that. Thank you for letting me see you tonight." Joseph lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "We don't have to have it all figured out, Taylor. We just have to be honest with each other. The rest, we can figure out together." And sitting there, in the soft glow of his living room, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like him, Taylor realized something that both terrified and thrilled her. She was falling in love with this man. The realization changed nothing and everything all at once. On the surface, Taylor's life continued as before. She went to work, navigated the insurance nightmare, spent evenings at Joseph's house or meeting him after his shifts. Biscuit and gravy gradually warmed to her, which Joseph declared to be the clearest sign of her worthiness as a human being. "Gravy let you scratch his belly," he said one evening, staring at the scene before him with something close to shock. "He doesn't let anyone scratch his belly. He bit my mom once." "Maybe I'm just charming." "Yeah." Joseph's voice softened as he watched her, a look on his face that made Taylor's stomach flip. "Maybe you are." But beneath the surface, everything was shifting. Taylor found herself thinking about Joseph constantly, not just the physical attraction, though that was certainly there, but the thousand small things that made him who he was. The way he laughed, full and unguarded. The way he remembered every detail she told him, filing away her favorite foods and movies and the specific way she liked her coffee. The way he talked to his dogs in complete sentences, as if expecting them to respond. She was falling deeper every day, and she still didn't know how to trust it. The doubts crept in at night when she was alone in Meredith's apartment. Was this real? Was she confusing gratitude with love? Would Joseph always be, in her mind, the hero who saved her, rather than just a man she was choosing? It was Meredith who finally forced her to confront it. "Okay." Her friend crossed her arms, blocking the doorway to the bedroom where Taylor was getting ready for a date. "I've watched you torture yourself for 2 months. Time for an intervention." "I'm not torturing myself." "Taylor, you looked up trauma bonding versus genuine attraction 11 times last week. I saw your search history." Taylor's face flushed. "That's a violation of my privacy." "I'm your best friend. Privacy violations come with the territory." Meredith moved into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "Listen to me. I've watched you date a lot of idiots over the years. I've seen you with guys who didn't deserve your time, who made you smaller, who never looked at you the way Joseph does. And I've never, not once, seen you as happy as you've been these past few weeks. But no buts." Meredith held up a hand. "Yes, you met him in an unusual way. Yes, there's complicated psychology around rescue situations. But Taylor, that man has spent 2 months showing you exactly who he is. Kind, patient, genuine, absolutely head over heels for you. At some point, you have to stop looking for reasons why it can't work and start letting yourself believe it might." Taylor sank onto the bed beside her friend, feeling the weight of the words settle over her. What if I'm wrong? What if I let myself believe in this and it falls apart? Then it falls apart. Meredith put an arm around her shoulders. That's the risk you take with any relationship. But the alternative is never taking the risk at all, and that's no way to live. You almost died, Tay. Don't you think you deserve to actually live now? The question hit Taylor like a physical blow. She'd spent so long since the fire just trying to survive, dealing with the logistics, processing the trauma, keeping her head above water. But at some point, survival had to give way to actually living, to taking chances, to letting herself want things and believe in them. Joseph was one of those things. You're right. Taylor stood up, squaring her shoulders. You're absolutely right. I'm going to tell him. Meredith's face broke into a grin. That's my girl. Taylor arrived at Joseph's house that evening with her heart in her throat and her palms sweating. She'd rehearsed what she wanted to say a dozen times on the drive over, but the words kept slipping away, rearranging themselves into configurations that seemed either too much or not enough. How did you tell someone that they'd changed everything for you? That you'd fallen in love with them? Despite every rational part of your brain telling you to be careful. Joseph met her at the door with a smile that faded as he took in her expression. "Hey, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Taylor stepped inside, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. I need to talk to you about something." Joseph's expression grew serious. He guided her to the couch, sitting close but not touching, giving her space. "Okay, I'm listening." Taylor took a deep breath, and then another. On the third breath, she finally found the words. "I've been scared." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Since the fire, since you carried me out of that building, I've been terrified that everything I feel for you isn't real, that it's just trauma or gratitude or some psychological response to a near-death experience." Joseph's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I've analyzed it from every angle. I've read articles and second-guessed myself and tried so hard to figure out if what I feel is genuine or just a side effect of survival." "And what did you decide?" Taylor looked at him, at this man who had walked into fire for her, who had held her when she cried, who had shown her 100 different ways that he was exactly who he seemed to be. "I decided that it doesn't matter." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You saved my life, Joseph. That's a fact. But everything that came after, the way you make me laugh, the way you listen, the way you've been patient and kind and never once made me feel like too much, that's not survival psychology. That's just you. And I'm done being afraid of how much I love you for it." Joseph went very still. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't speak, and Taylor felt panic rising in her chest. And then his free hand came up to cup her face, tilting it toward him, and she saw that his brown eyes were shining. "Taylor." Her name came out like a prayer. "Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting to hear you say that?" "You have?" "From the moment I met you." He leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "I knew I was in trouble that first day at the hospital. When you looked at me with those eyes, when you tried to thank me even though you could barely speak, I knew. And every day since then, watching you fight through everything you've been through, getting to know the incredible person you are. Taylor, I fell in love with you so slowly and so completely that I can't even remember what my life looked like before you were in it." "Joseph." "I love you." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Not because I saved you. Not because of some hero complex or rescue fantasy. I love you because you're brilliant and funny and stronger than anyone I've ever met. I love the way you argue with me about movies, and the way you can't cook anything that requires more than 3 steps, and the way you talk to my dogs like they're people." He laughed softly, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I love everything about you, and I have been waiting so patiently for you to believe that this was real." "I believe it." Taylor was laughing and crying at the same time. "I believe you." Joseph kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise more than a passion. And when they finally broke apart, both of them slightly breathless and grinning like idiots, Taylor felt something slot into place in her chest. This was real. This was right. This was the rest of her life, beginning in this moment. 1 year later, Taylor stood in the doorway of the house she now shared with Joseph, watching him wrestle with a Christmas tree that was clearly too big for their living room. "It's going to fit." His voice was muffled by pine branches. "I measured." "You measured the tree or the ceiling?" A pause. "The tree is the important measurement." Taylor laughed, setting down the box of ornaments she'd been carrying and going to help him. Together, they managed to maneuver the tree into the corner, where it stood at a slight angle that they both agreed to pretend they didn't notice. "See?" Joseph brushed needles off his sweater. "Perfect fit." If perfect means touching the ceiling and also slightly crooked, then yes, perfect. He caught her around the waist, pulling her against him with a grin that still made her heart stutter, even after all this time. "You love it." "I love you." She pressed a quick kiss to his jaw. "The tree is growing on me." They'd come so far from that hospital room, from those first tentative texts and coffee dates, and the long, winding road to trust. Taylor had found a new apartment and then moved in with Joseph when it became clear that neither of them wanted to spend a night apart. She'd started therapy to work through the trauma of the fire and found that the more she talked about it, the less power it held over her. She'd even changed jobs, taking a risk on a smaller company that valued work-life balance over grinding productivity. She was still making spreadsheets, but now she actually enjoyed them. And through all of it, Joseph had been there, steady as a rock, warm as a fire, the good kind of fire, the kind that didn't destroy but illuminated. He'd held her through nightmares and celebrated her victories and been exactly what she needed, even when she hadn't known what that was. "Hey." Joseph's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Where'd you go?" "Just thinking about how lucky I am." Taylor looked up at him, feeling the familiar swell of love in her chest. "A year ago, I was terrified and lost and didn't know how I was going to survive. Now I have this house and this ridiculous tree and you. It still doesn't feel real sometimes." "It's real." He kissed her forehead. "And it's only going to get better." There was something in his voice, a nervous edge that Taylor might have missed if she hadn't learned to read him so well over the past year. "Joseph, what's going on?" He stepped back, running a hand through his hair in that gesture she knew meant he was working up to something. "I had a plan, a whole speech. I was going to wait until we had the tree decorated and the lights on, and it was going to be this perfect romantic moment." "What are you talking about?" "But I can't wait." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for 3 weeks, trying to find the right moment, and every moment with you is the right moment. So I need to do this now." Taylor's hand flew to her mouth as Joseph dropped to one knee on their living room floor, surrounded by scattered pine needles and boxes of ornaments and the slightly crooked tree that they both loved anyway. "Taylor, a year ago I carried you out of the worst moment of your life, and you changed mine forever. You made me believe in fate and second chances and all those things I used to think were just movie plots. You make me laugh, and you challenge me, and you put up with my terrible pancakes and my stubborn dogs and my inability to buy a reasonably sized Christmas tree." Taylor was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also laughing, because this was so them. Imperfect and chaotic and absolutely wonderful. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to be the person you come home to, the person who holds you when things fall apart, the person you build a future with. So, Taylor. He opened the box, revealing a ring that sparkled in the afternoon light. Will you marry me? Yes! The word burst out of her without hesitation. Yes, absolutely! 1,000 times yes! Joseph surged to his feet, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while Biscuit and Gravy barked in confusion at their feet. And when he finally set her down and slid the ring onto her finger, Taylor looked at this man who had started as her rescuer and become her everything, and knew without a doubt that this was exactly where she was meant to be. I love you, Taylor. I love you too. She kissed him soundly. Now, let's decorate this ridiculous tree. The wedding took place on a warm June day in Joseph's mother's backyard, surrounded by family and friends and the two most judgmental beagles in the state. Taylor walked down the makeshift aisle in a simple white dress, Meredith at her side as her maid of honor, her father waiting to give her away. But her eyes were on Joseph, standing under an arch of white flowers, looking at her like she was the sun itself. She'd worried in the weeks leading up to this moment about what people would think. The questions had started almost immediately after they announced their engagement. Isn't it weird that he saved her life? Isn't she just grateful? Can you really build a real relationship from something like that? But standing here now, watching Joseph's eyes fill with tears as she approached, Taylor didn't have a single doubt left in her heart. This wasn't rescue romance. This wasn't trauma bonding or gratitude mistaken for love. This was two people who had found each other in the most unexpected circumstances and chosen, every single day since then, to build something real. You're beautiful, Joseph whispered as she reached him, his voice thick with emotion. You're not so bad yourself. Taylor reached up to brush a tear from his cheek. Ready to do this? I've been ready since the day I met you. The ceremony was short and sweet. They both agreed they didn't need anything elaborate, just each other and the people they loved. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, words that probably didn't make sense to anyone but them, full of inside jokes about burned pancakes and stubborn dogs, and the tiny apartment where they'd had their first real conversation. And when the officiant finally said the words they'd been waiting to hear, "You may now kiss the bride," Joseph pulled her into his arms with such tenderness that Taylor felt it in every corner of her soul. Hello, wife. Hello, husband. They kissed to the sound of applause and barking dogs and the unmistakable sob of Joseph's mother in the front row. And when they finally broke apart, Taylor looked out at the gathered crowd, her family, his family, the firefighters from Station 47 who had become her family too, and felt a gratitude so profound it almost brought her to her knees. 1 year ago, she had been trapped in a burning room, certain she was going to die. Now she was standing in the sunshine, married to the love of her life, surrounded by people who cared about her. She'd survived the fire. But more than that, she'd learned to live again. And as Joseph took her hand and led her down the aisle to the rest of their lives together, Taylor knew with absolute certainty that the best was still to come. They bought a bigger house 3 years later, one with a yard for Biscuit and Gravy and a spare room that Joseph insisted they paint yellow just in case. Just in case what? Taylor asked, watching him roll paint onto the walls with more enthusiasm than skill. Just in case we have some good news one of these days. He glanced over his shoulder at her. I've always wanted to be a dad, And I've seen the way you look at babies. I do not look at babies any particular way. Taylor, you cried at the grocery store last week because a baby waved at you. That baby had very aggressive waving skills. It was emotional. Joseph laughed, setting down his paint roller and crossing to where she stood in the doorway. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. There's no pressure. Whenever you're ready. If you're ever ready. But if you want to know, he pressed a kiss to her temple. I think you'd be an incredible mom. Taylor leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. I think I'd like that. She turned in his arms to face him. I think I'd like that a lot, actually. Joseph's face broke into a grin so bright it could have lit the whole room. Yeah? Yeah. 8 months later, they stood in that same yellow room, now filled with a crib and a changing table and more stuffed animals than any one baby could possibly need. Taylor was enormous. At least, that's how she felt at 37 weeks pregnant. But Joseph looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He'd been insufferable about it, honestly. Constantly touching her belly, talking to the baby in the mornings, falling asleep with his hand curved protectively over their child. I still can't believe this is happening. His voice was soft as he arranged a row of tiny onesies in the dresser drawer. In a few weeks, there's going to be an actual human in here. Our human. That's generally how babies work, yes. I know, He turned to look at her, and she saw that his eyes were glistening. I never imagined I could be this happy. When I became a firefighter, I thought saving people was going to be the most meaningful thing I ever did. And it was important. It still is. But this... He gestured between them, at the nursery, at everything they'd built. This is everything. Taylor felt her own eyes fill with tears. Pregnancy hormones, she would have claimed, but they both knew better. Come here. Joseph crossed to her, kneeling in front of the chair where she sat, his hands resting on her belly. You saved my life, Joseph Hartwell. Taylor cupped his face in her hands. And then you made it worth living, every single day. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I love you too. He turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. And I love this little person who's going to have your eyes and hopefully not my inability to cook. That's a very specific hope. It's a very specific curse. I don't want to pass it on. Taylor laughed until her belly ached, until Joseph was laughing too, until Biscuit and Gravy wandered in to investigate the commotion and ended up falling asleep at their feet. And in that moment, surrounded by yellow walls and tiny onesies and the life they'd built together, Taylor knew that this was it. This was the happiness she'd never dared to hope for, the future she'd almost lost in a burning building 5 years ago. She'd been saved by a firefighter, and then she'd spent every day since saving herself, choosing love over fear, choosing hope over doubt, choosing this extraordinary man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. It was, she thought, the best rescue story of all. Did you like the story? Do you want a part 2? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, comment which state you're watching from so I can give you a shout out in the next videos. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel so you can stay updated on our next uploads. Thanks for watching!